The cold wind blew fiercely across the open plains, carrying with it the sharp scent of pine and snow. Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she trudged through the uneven path leading to the ranch. Her boots sank into the soft ground, half frozen from the first frost of winter. She had been traveling for 2 days, moving from town to town, looking for work and a place to belong. After losing her husband a few months ago, Clara had no family left to turn to. The world felt big, lonely, and uncertain, but the thought of finding shelter at this ranch gave her a small flicker of hope. She had heard from a passing traveler that the ranch had work and that the owner might let her stay. It was a long shot, but she had no other choice. As she approached the ranch, the first thing she noticed was the large wooden fence surrounding the property, weathered but sturdy. Smoke rose from the chimneys of the main house and the bunkhouse, curling into the gray sky. The sight made her heart beat a little faster. She hadn't seen another soul for miles, and seeing signs of life gave her comfort. She paused at the gate, gathering courage, and finally stepped through. Her boots crunched against the frozen soil as she walked up to the main yard. Jack, the ranch's main cowboy, was leaning against the side of the barn, his hat pulled low over his brow. He looked up as Clara approached, his sharp eyes taking in her figure. She could tell immediately that he was cautious, maybe even suspicious. His broad shoulders and rough hands suggested he had spent most of his life working under the open sky, handling cattle, repairing fences, and surviving the harsh elements of the West. He didn't smile, didn't speak, and for a moment, Clara wondered if she had made a mistake by coming here. "I'm looking for work," Clara said finally, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "I heard this is a place that might need help." She tried to sound confident, though she had spent the last few days feeling anything but. Her hands were numb from the cold, and she tucked them into the folds of her shawl. "I can cook, clean, and do farm work. Anything you need. Buy. Cheese. Buy." Jack studied her silently, the wind ruffling the brim of his hat. "You're a long way from town," he said after a pause, his voice low and measured. "And it's not easy work here. You sure you're ready for this?" Clara met his gaze without flinching. "I have to be. I don't have anywhere else to go." He nodded slowly, as if weighing her words carefully. "All right. There's work to be done. You can start with the animals. Feed the horses, water the cattle, and then I'll show you the bunkhouse. It's cold at night, but you'll be safe there." Relief washed over Clara. She nodded, following him as he led the way to the stables. The air smelled of hay and leather, a mixture that somehow felt comforting. She had grown up around animals, and the familiarity made her step more confident. Jack handed her a bucket and pointed toward the feed troughs. "Start with the horses. Make sure they have enough hay. Then, check the water." Clara set to work, her hands moving quickly despite the chill. The horses whinnied softly, nuzzling her for attention. She spoke to them in quiet tones, her voice calm and steady. Jack watched from a distance, silent but observant. She could feel his eyes on her, not in a threatening way, but like someone who wanted to understand her, to see if she could handle life on a ranch. It made her self-conscious at first, but she pushed the thought aside, focusing on the tasks at hand. Hours passed, and by mid-afternoon, Clara had moved from the stables to checking the cattle. The work was harder than she remembered from her childhood, lifting hay bales, mending fences, and guiding the cattle into pens. Her arms ached, her boots were muddy, and her face was flushed from the effort. But she felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in months. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt useful. She looked over at Jack, who was repairing a fence nearby. He didn't smile, but he gave her a nod of approval, a small gesture that made her chest tighten with pride. When the work was done, Jack led her to the bunkhouse. It was a simple wooden building, sturdy and warm. Smoke curled from a small chimney, and the smell of burning wood greeted them as they stepped inside. The room was modest, with several beds lined along the walls, a small table in the center, and a wood stove in the corner. Jack showed her the bed she would sleep in, and handed her a blanket. "It's not much, but it's dry and warm," he said. "You'll be safe here." Clara thanked him, her voice soft. She set her belongings down and looked around the small room. For the first time in days, she felt a sense of safety. The bunkhouse might be simple, but it was a place where she could rest, gather her strength, and maybe, just maybe, start to rebuild her life. She could hear the wind howling outside, but inside, it felt calm, sheltered, and secure. She set about making her bed, arranging her few possessions neatly, and took a deep breath. The world outside was still harsh, but inside these walls, she could feel hope beginning to grow. That evening, after supper, Clara and Jack sat by the fire. Jack had prepared a simple meal, bread, stew, and coffee. Clara ate quickly, ravenous from the day's labor. But she noticed how Jack watched her with an intensity that made her uneasy. Not unkind, but careful, as if he were measuring her, trying to understand her. She realized she was doing the same, studying him. There was something in his eyes, a hint of sadness and loss, a depth she couldn't quite reach yet. She didn't know what had happened to him, but she sensed that life had not been kind. As the fire crackled, they talked. At first, it was small talk where she had come from, how long he had been on the ranch, but soon the conversation deepened. Clara spoke of her husband, of the accident that had taken him, and of the loneliness she had felt since. Jack listened quietly, offering only brief responses. But she could sense that he understood more than he let on. He didn't pry, didn't judge, and that simple act of listening made her feel a little lighter. She realized that despite the hardships, she was not completely alone. In this remote, snowy ranch, two people who had known loss were beginning to find understanding in each other. Night fell, and the bunkhouse grew colder. Clara wrapped herself tightly in the blanket, the warmth from the stove barely keeping the chill at bay. She could hear the distant howl of wolves, the creak of trees in the wind, and the faint sound of the cattle settling in for the night. She felt a shiver run down her spine, not from fear, but from the realization of how fragile life could be. Yet in that fragility, there was also strength. She had survived this far, and tomorrow, she would face another day. Jack spoke again, breaking the silence. "You did good today. Not everyone can handle the work, but you kept going." His voice was gruff, but not unkind. Clara smiled faintly, feeling a small surge of pride. "Thank you. It's hard, but I want to learn." There was a pause, and then Jack added, almost to himself, "You're different from most who come here." Clara didn't ask what he meant, but she felt a sense of connection, a small thread forming between them. As she lay down to sleep, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here, the long walks, the empty towns, the nights spent under the stars, and she realized that she had found a place that felt like a beginning rather than an ending. The bunkhouse was small, the work hard, and the weather unforgiving. But it was a place where she could start over. She closed her eyes, the sound of the fire and the wind lulling her into a deep sleep. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside, hope had taken root. Tomorrow would be another day, and she was ready to face it, one step at a time, with the cowboy who had silently become a part of her new life. The morning light seeped through the small cracks in the bunkhouse walls, painting long streaks of gold across the wooden floor. Clara stirred beneath her blanket, stretching her stiff limbs and rubbing the sleep from her eyes. The cold of the night had clung to her bones, but the warmth of the stove and the quiet presence of the ranch offered comfort. She dressed quickly, pulling on her boots and wrapping her shawl tightly, and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The world was still, blanketed in white snow, and the ranch looked almost magical under the early sunlight. Her breath came out in small clouds as she began her chores. the rhythm of work grounding her in the moment. Jack was already outside, checking the fences and observing the cattle grazing in the frozen field. He nodded briefly as he saw Clara approach, his expression unreadable. "Morning," he said simply. Clara responded with a soft greeting and moved toward the stables. Over the past day, she had begun to learn the routine of the ranch, the animals, the chores, the rhythm of life that was harsh but honest. Each movement felt natural, as if she had always belonged to this kind of work, even if her body protested the early hours and heavy labor. She began with the horses, brushing their coats, feeding them, and checking their hooves for injury. One of the younger horses, a chestnut mare with a white streak across her forehead, nuzzled her hand and whinnied softly. Clara smiled, her heart lifting a little. Working with animals had always brought her peace. And in these quiet moments, she felt a connection to the world that had been absent since her husband's death. Jack watched silently from the fence line, occasionally offering brief advice or corrections, but mostly letting her work on her own. The silence between them was not awkward. It was comfortable, a shared understanding of respect and space. By mid-morning, the sun had risen higher, warming the frozen ground just enough to make the work slightly easier. Clara moved on to the cattle, guiding them from one pen to another and making sure the water troughs were full. Her arms ached from lifting heavy buckets, and her fingers were numb from the cold. But she pushed through, driven by determination and a sense of purpose. Jack occasionally joined her, showing her the quickest way to move the cattle or how to repair a broken fence post. His movements were precise, practiced, and there was a quiet strength in the way he handled each task. Clara began to see not just the physical toughness of a cowboy, but the patience and skill required to survive in this life. During a brief pause, Clara and Jack sat on a fallen log, sharing a quiet moment as they sipped from mugs of steaming coffee. The ranch was alive with the sound of animals and the wind rustling through the trees. But here, there was a stillness that allowed them to speak without interruption. Clara found herself opening up in a way she hadn't with anyone else. She spoke of the loneliness that had followed her since her husband's death, of the uncertainty she felt about her future, and of the strange mix of fear and hope she carried with her. Jack listened quietly, his face calm. But there was a softness in his eyes that betrayed a man who had known loss himself. "You've been through a lot," he said finally, his voice low. "But you keep going. That takes strength." Clara felt a warmth in her chest at his words, a reassurance that she had not fully expected. "I have to keep going," she replied. "I don't have any other choice." There was a pause, a moment of shared understanding, before they returned to their work, the rhythm of their tasks resuming like the steady beat of a drum. As the day wore on, Clara began to feel a growing sense of belonging. The ranch was demanding, yes, but it was also honest. Each day required effort, attention, and care. And in return, it offered a kind of stability she had not felt in months. She noticed small things, the way Jack's eyes softened when he spoke to the animals, the care he took in repairing fences, the way he respected the land. It was a life built on perseverance and responsibility, and she felt drawn to it in a way she hadn't anticipated. By afternoon, a small task that seemed simple at first turned into a challenge. A gate had frozen shut, and the metal handle was covered in ice. Clara tried to pull it free, but it wouldn't budge. Jack stepped forward, placing his hands on the metal and giving a firm shove. The gate swung open with a groan, and Clara stepped back, surprised. "Sometimes you just need a little help," Jack said with a hint of a smile. Clara laughed softly, the sound breaking the tension of the day. "I guess so," she admitted. There was something comforting in this small moment. A reminder that even in hard times, support could come in unexpected ways. Later, as the sun began to sink behind the distant hills, Clara returned to the bunkhouse. Her body tired, but her spirit lifted. Jack followed a few moments later, carrying extra blankets and a small lantern. The inside of the bunkhouse was cozy, the fire crackling in the stove and casting warm light on the walls. They worked in silence, preparing a simple meal together, soup and bread, enough to fill empty stomachs. Clara marveled at the simplicity and the quiet efficiency of life here. It was not luxurious, but it was honest, and in that honesty, she felt a deep sense of peace. After the meal, they sat together. The silence, now comfortable and unpressured. Clara began to notice small details about Jack, how his hands were calloused but careful, how his eyes held a shadow of past sorrow, and how his voice carried both authority and gentleness. She realized that beneath his tough exterior, there was a man who had lived through hardship and carried it with quiet dignity. Jack, for his part, seemed to recognize Clara's resilience and determination. She was not just a fragile woman seeking shelter. She was someone who could endure, who could adapt, who could contribute to the life of the ranch in meaningful ways. As the night deepened, the wind outside grew stronger, rattling the wooden walls of the bunkhouse and whistling through the cracks. Clara wrapped herself tightly in her blanket, the warmth of the fire providing comfort against the chill. She felt a sense of gratitude for the animals she had come to care for the work that challenged her, and for the quiet companionship of Jack. It was not yet friendship in the fullest sense, but it was a start. A connection was forming, delicate but real, built on shared experience and mutual respect. Before sleep, Clara took a moment to reflect on the day. She had arrived here a stranger, uncertain and cautious, carrying the weight of her loss. But now, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The ranch was hard, the work demanding, and the world outside was still harsh. But she had begun to find her place in it. Jack had not offered words of comfort or pity, but his steady presence, his quiet guidance, and his respect had given her a sense of belonging she had longed for. She realized that survival was not just about enduring the cold or performing tasks. It was about finding people, places, and moments that made life meaningful again. As she drifted off to sleep, the fire casting flickering shadows across the room, Clara knew that the days ahead would not be easy. There would be more challenges, more cold mornings, and more hard work. But she felt ready to face them, step by step, with courage and determination. The bunkhouse, once a simple shelter, was becoming a place of safety, learning, and slowly, connection. And in that connection, Clara sensed the beginnings of something deeper, a bond not yet fully understood, but growing stronger with each passing day. Outside, the snow continued to fall softly, covering the world in white silence. Inside, the warmth of fire, the rhythm of work, and the quiet companionship of two people who had known loss created a sense of peace that had been absent for too long. Clara closed her eyes with a small, contented sigh, ready to face the next day, ready to learn, to grow, and to discover what life on this rugged ranch could teach her, not just about survival, but about resilience, trust, and the quiet strength found in unlikely friendships. The morning began quietly, the sun hidden behind thick gray clouds that promised snow. Clara woke to the soft whine of the wind and the occasional thump of frost-laden branches against the roof. She shivered as she dressed, pulling her shawl tightly around her shoulders. The ranch, usually full of light and warmth by mid-morning, now seemed subdued under the heavy sky. She could feel the chill deep in her bones. But the work would not wait. Jack was already outside, moving with purpose, checking the fences, and peering at the horizon. His expression was serious, hinting that this day would be unlike any other. "Storm's coming," Jack said without looking at her. His voice was steady, but carried a weight of warning. "We need to make sure everything's secure before it hits." Clara nodded, sensing the urgency. She grabbed a broom and some ropes and followed him, the wind pushing against her, as if testing her resolve. The first flakes of snow began to fall lightly, dusting the ground and the animals with a soft white layer. It was beautiful, almost peaceful, but there was a tension in the air that made Clara uneasy. This storm would not be like any ordinary snow. It had the power to isolate them completely. The day passed quickly as they worked tirelessly to prepare the ranch. Clara fed the animals, reinforced the fences, and helped move supplies to the shelter of the barn. Jack moved with efficiency and calm, instructing her when necessary, but letting her handle tasks on her own whenever possible. The wind grew stronger, biting at her face and turning her fingers numb despite her gloves. Yet, there was something exhilarating about the challenge. The way she could feel the raw power of nature pressing down on them and still keep moving, keep working. She glanced at Jack occasionally, noting how effortlessly he handled the storm preparations. His calmness inspired her, and she began to understand that strength was not just in muscles, but in patience, experience, and the ability to stay composed under pressure. By late afternoon, the snow had thickened, falling in heavy, wet flakes that coated the ground and blanketed the animals. The cattle huddled together for warmth, lowing softly, while the horses stamped their hooves, restless. Clara could see her breath in the cold air, and the wind howled like a living creature. Jack called her over to help secure a loose gate that threatened to be blown open by the gusts. Together, they pulled, tied, and hammered until it was firm. Standing back, Clara felt a surge of pride. The storm might be fierce, but they were prepared. And the ranch was safe for the night. At least for now. As darkness fell, the snowstorm intensified. The sky turned a deep gray, and visibility dropped to just a few feet. Clara and Jack retreated to the bunkhouse, their clothes wet and stiff from the cold. Inside, the warmth of the fire was immediate relief. But the wind rattling the wooden walls reminded them of the storm outside. They moved around the small room, shaking off snow and trying to dry their clothing. Clara's heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the intensity of the situation. Being trapped in the bunkhouse with Jack, so close, made her suddenly aware of how strong his presence was. He didn't speak much, but the way he worked, the way he moved, the quiet steadiness he radiated, it was impossible to ignore. The storm outside made them rely on each other completely. With the cattle safely in the pens, the barn secured, and extra supplies stacked in the corner, there was little else to do but wait. Clara sat by the fire, trying to warm her fingers and dry her soaked gloves. Jack moved around, checking the stove, preparing hot coffee, and making sure the animals were quiet and safe. She noticed for the first time the depth of his care for the ranch, for the animals, and for the people who worked there. He was tough, yes, but there was also compassion in the way he handled everything. A gentleness that she hadn't expected from someone who seemed so rugged and reserved. As the hours passed, the storm raged outside, snow piling high against the windows, wind shaking the walls, and occasional cracks of ice echoing like distant thunder. Clara and Jack worked together to keep the bunkhouse warm, passing wood for the fire and checking the stove. In the quiet moments, they spoke softly, sharing stories to pass the time. Clara told Jack about her childhood, about the little farm she had grown up on, and about her husband. Jack listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or asking a quiet question. His presence grounding her in a way that surprised her. She realized she was beginning to trust him. Not just with work, but with her fears, her thoughts, and the memories she had kept locked inside. At one point, the wind caused a heavy branch to scrape against the side of the bunkhouse, startling Clara. She jumped back instinctively, her heart racing, and Jack quickly moved to her side. "It's all right," he said calmly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. The touch was brief, but it sent a warm shiver down her spine. Clara looked at him, seeing for the first time, not just the cowboy, but the human being, the man who had also faced storms, loss, and isolation. For a moment, Words failed her, replaced by the shared understanding that they were in this together. The storm outside mirrored the intensity of emotions brewing quietly between them, a mixture of fear, relief, and unspoken connection. Hours turned into night, and the storm showed no signs of slowing. Clara and Jack continued their quiet routines, moving around the bunkhouse with careful efficiency. They passed each other in the small space, exchanging brief words and gestures, each aware of the other's presence in a way that went beyond simple companionship. There was a tension in the air, not one of conflict, but of closeness, a bond forged under the pressure of shared challenge. Clara felt herself leaning on Jack's steadiness, and she knew he felt the same, though neither spoke of it directly. The storm had trapped them together. Yes, but it had also revealed the strength and reliability in each other, a connection that could not be ignored. Later, as the fire burned low and the snow continued to fall outside, Clara and Jack finally allowed themselves a moment of rest. They sat together, sipping coffee, the warmth spreading through their chilled bodies. Clara felt a wave of exhaustion, but also a strange contentment. The storm had forced them to rely on each other, and in that reliance, a sense of trust had grown. She realized that life on the ranch was not just about physical survival, but about human connection, about being seen, understood, and valued. Jack's quiet presence had become a source of comfort, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, one was not truly alone. As she prepared for bed, Clara paused for a moment, looking at Jack. He was checking the stove, his face lit by the glow of the fire, and she noticed the lines of weariness on his face, the careful attention he gave to every small task. She realized that beneath his rugged exterior, he carried his own burdens, his own fears, and his own loneliness. And yet, despite all that, he had made space for her, had included her in this small world, had offered his trust and his companionship. Clara felt a quiet gratitude, a recognition that the storm, terrifying as it was, had brought them closer in a way that nothing else could. Finally, she climbed into her bed, pulling the blankets tightly around herself. Jack had gone to check on the animals one last time before settling down on his own bed across the room. Clara listened to the wind howling outside, the sound mingling with the soft breathing of the animals and the faint crackle of the dying fire. She felt safe, surprisingly safe, despite the fury of the storm. And as she drifted toward sleep, she realized that this moment, this shared struggle, this mutual trust, this quiet bond, was the beginning of something important. The storm had not just tested their endurance. It had revealed their resilience, their empathy, and the first hints of a deep, meaningful connection between two people who had both known loss. Outside, the world was wild, frozen, and relentless. But inside the bunkhouse, warmth, trust, and understanding had taken root. The storm continued to rage, but Clara no longer felt alone. She had Jack by her side, steady and reliable. And together, they faced the uncertainty and harshness of the winter, knowing that they could endure it. One task, one moment, and one shared experience at a time. And in that endurance, they were beginning to find something precious: hope, companionship, and the quiet strength that comes from facing life's challenges together. The morning after the storm dawned crisp and clear. The sky, once dark and threatening, was now a pale blue, and the sun glinted off the thick layer of snow that covered the ranch. Clara stepped outside, breathing in the cold air, feeling the crunch of snow beneath her boots. Everything looked fresh and clean, as if the storm had washed the world and left it new. Despite the beauty, she felt a quiet tension in the air, the kind that comes after surviving something difficult together. She glanced at Jack, who was already tending to the animals, his movements careful and practiced. He noticed her watching and gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of the night they had endured together. After the storm, the work on the ranch was both urgent and delicate. Some of the fences had been damaged, and a few pens had shifted under the weight of the snow. Clara joined Jack in repairing them, hauling wooden beams and hammering nails, her muscles still sore from the previous days. Jack worked alongside her, showing her how to brace posts properly, how to adjust the tension on the wires, and how to ensure the animals remained safe. The work was hard, but there was a sense of accomplishment in every repaired fence, every secure pen. Clara felt proud, knowing that their teamwork had made a difference. The storm had been a test, and they had passed it together. As they worked, Jack finally began to speak more openly about himself. He shared stories of his early years on the ranch, the long hours spent tending cattle, and the losses he had endured. Clara listened quietly, feeling a mix of empathy and curiosity. She had always known that Jack was a man shaped by hardship, but hearing the details of his life made him seem even more real, more human. He spoke of the people he had known and lost, the challenges that had shaped his character, and the quiet loneliness that had always accompanied him, even in the busiest seasons. Clara felt a connection growing stronger, a bond not just of shared work, but of shared understanding and experience. In turn, Clara spoke of her own past, carefully selecting the parts of her life she felt safe sharing. She told Jack about her childhood, the love she had for her husband, and the sorrow that followed his untimely death. She described the long days of mourning, the uncertainty of life after such a loss, and the courage it had taken to keep moving forward. Jack listened attentively, never interrupting. And when she finished, he gave her a quiet nod. "It takes courage to start over," he said simply. Clara felt a warmth in her chest at his words, a recognition that she was seen and understood, not just as a worker or a widow, but as a person with strength and resilience. The day passed in a rhythm of work and conversation. They repaired fences, cleared paths, and ensured the animals were comfortable and secure. Between tasks, they shared small moments of laughter, joking lightly about their mistakes or the stubbornness of the animals. These moments were precious, lightening the weight of their shared responsibilities. Clara found herself enjoying Jack's company more than she had expected. His humor was subtle, but genuine, and beneath his rugged exterior was a kindness that was beginning to feel familiar and comforting. For Jack, Clara's determination, intelligence, and warmth made her stand out among the many people who had come and gone on the ranch. He found himself respecting her not only for her work ethic but for her courage in facing a new life so soon after loss. As evening approached, Clara prepared the small meal in the bunkhouse, while Jack checked on the animals one last time. The room was warm, filled with the aroma of cooking, and outside, the snow glistened in the fading light. They ate together in a quiet, comfortable silence, the events of the day settling around them like a soft blanket. Clara felt a sense of ease she hadn't experienced in a long time. The storm had forced them to rely on each other, and now, in the calm that followed, that reliance had grown into trust. She realized that she was beginning to see Jack not just as a mentor or employer, but as someone she could lean on emotionally, someone who understood her fears, her hopes, and her need for connection. After the meal, they sat by the fire, the heat radiating through their tired bodies. The storm had left its mark on the landscape, but it had also created a quiet space for them to reflect and talk. Jack spoke of his fears, his worries about the future of the ranch, and the challenges of keeping everything running smoothly. Clara offered her perspective, suggesting small improvements and solutions, showing her growing confidence in understanding the life of the ranch. Jack listened, sometimes surprised by her insight, and at other times grateful for her ideas. This collaboration, born out of necessity, had strengthened their connection. They were no longer simply two people who had survived a storm. They were partners in facing the demands of life on the ranch. As night fell, Clara and Jack found themselves alone in the bunkhouse once more. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Clara noticed the softness in Jack's eyes that was rarely visible during the day, a glimpse of the man beneath the tough exterior. For a moment, neither spoke, each lost in thought, reflecting on the events of the day and the storm that had changed so much. Clara felt a shiver run through her, not from cold, but from the realization that something was shifting between them. There was a closeness, a trust, and an emotional connection that had grown stronger through shared struggle and quiet understanding. Jack finally broke the silence. "You've done well," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "Not everyone can handle what you've handled these past few days. You're stronger than you think." Clara smiled, feeling a mixture of pride and gratitude. "I had a good teacher," she replied lightly, though her heart beat faster at his words. They shared a quiet laugh, the tension easing slightly, but the depth of unspoken feelings lingered in the room. They had been through so much together in a short time, and yet, there was still so much about each other they had yet to discover. As they prepared for sleep, Clara took a moment to reflect on the past days. She had arrived at the ranch seeking work and shelter, uncertain of what she would find. In just a few days, she had discovered a rhythm, a purpose, and a sense of belonging she hadn't felt since her husband's death. Jack had become more than just a coworker. He was someone she could rely on, someone whose presence brought comfort and reassurance. The storm had forced them together, but the bond that had formed in its wake was more than just circumstance. It was a connection built on shared experiences, trust, and the quiet understanding of two people who had known loss. Jack, too, lay awake in his bed, thinking of Clara. Her resilience, her courage, and her ability to adapt so quickly had impressed him. But more than that, it was her warmth, her kindness, and the quiet strength she carried within her that had drawn him in. He realized that in the midst of the storm and the work of the ranch, he had begun to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of hope, a sense that perhaps life could still offer connection and understanding, even after great loss. The storm had tested them, yes, but it had also revealed the depth of their characters and the possibility of something meaningful forming between them. The next morning promised a return to the routine of the ranch, but Clara and Jack both knew that something had changed. They moved through their chores with the same efficiency and dedication, but the moments of laughter, the shared glances, and the quiet understanding between them hinted at the growing emotional bond. The storm was behind them, but its effects remained, an invisible thread connecting two people who had faced hardship together and emerged stronger, more aware of their own resilience and more open to the possibility of trust, companionship, and even hope. By the end of the day, the ranch was secure, the animals cared for, and the work accomplished. Clara and Jack shared a quiet meal, their conversation light but meaningful, touching on dreams, memories, and plans for the future. The emotional closeness between them had deepened, built on shared experience, understanding, and the recognition of each other's strength. They had survived a storm together. But more importantly, they had begun to see each other in a way that went beyond survival, recognizing resilience, compassion, and the potential for connection. As night fell, Clara settled into her bed, her thoughts filled with the events of the day and the realization that she had found a place of belonging, trust, and safety. Jack's presence, once distant and cautious, now felt reassuring and comforting. The bunkhouse, the ranch, and the experiences they shared had created a space where vulnerability and understanding could grow. And in that space, both Clara and Jack began to see the possibility of a future that, while uncertain, held promise, companionship, and the quiet hope that comes from facing life's challenges together. The morning after the storm was calm and bright. The sky was a clear blue, and the sun reflected off the thick blanket of snow covering the ranch. Everything looked fresh and untouched, like a new beginning. Clara stepped outside, taking in the sparkling landscape and inhaling the crisp winter air. Her boots crunched against the snow as she moved toward the barn, where Jack was already at work, checking on the animals. The quiet of the morning was different from the tense stillness during the storm. Now it carried a sense of hope and promise. Clara felt a renewed energy. The challenges of the past days had left her stronger, more confident, and aware of the growing bond she shared with Jack. The ranch needed attention after the storm. Some fences had been damaged, a few gates were frozen, and paths were blocked by snowdrifts. Clara and Jack worked side by side, clearing the snow, repairing fences, and making sure the animals were safe and comfortable. The rhythm of their labor was familiar now, almost comforting. Clara noticed how naturally they worked together, anticipating each other's moves, sharing tools, and offering assistance without needing to speak. There was a silent understanding that had grown between them, a trust built from shared effort, mutual respect, and the challenges they had overcome. It was the kind of connection that didn't need words to be felt deeply. By mid-morning, Jack paused to rest against a fence post, wiping the sweat from his brow despite the cold. Clara joined him, sipping water from her flask. For a moment, they just looked out over the ranch, watching the sun glint off the snow and listening to the quiet sounds of the animals. It was a peaceful moment, one that felt earned after the storm. Clara felt her heart lift as she realized how far she had come in just a few days. She had gone from a stranger, uncertain and wary, to a part of this small world, trusted and respected by Jack, and slowly finding her own place in life again. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of shared understanding and quiet comfort. As the day continued, Jack finally spoke of plans for the future of the ranch. He shared concerns about maintaining the land, ensuring the animals' safety, and keeping the operation running smoothly through the harsh winters ahead. Clara listened, offering her suggestions and insights from the past day's experiences. Her thoughts were thoughtful, practical, and surprisingly effective. Jack's eyes softened as he considered her words, impressed by her intelligence and her growing familiarity with ranch life. They discussed strategies for the upcoming weeks, from repairing fences before the next snowfall to rationing supplies carefully. It was not just work, it was a collaboration that reflected mutual respect and growing trust. During a quiet moment, Clara spoke about her hopes for the future. "I've spent so much time just surviving," she said softly. "But now I want to do more than that. I want to build something. Something that matters." Jack nodded thoughtfully, understanding not just her words, but the courage behind them. "It's not easy," he said, "but you've already shown you can handle more than most. Maybe this is a place to start again." Clara felt a warmth in her chest, not from the fire or the sun, but from the sense of hope that Jack's words carried. It was the first time in months that she allowed herself to imagine a life beyond mere survival, a life where she could grow, contribute, and belong. By afternoon, the work was mostly complete. The fences were secure, the gates repaired, and the animals content. Clara and Jack walked across the ranch, checking the boundaries one last time. The snow, now sparkling under the afternoon sun, created a serene atmosphere, masking the challenges they had faced just days before. They paused by the barn, taking a moment to breathe and appreciate their accomplishments. Clara felt a sense of pride in herself and in their teamwork. The storm had tested them, but it had also revealed their strengths, resilience, and ability to rely on one another. The bond they shared was no longer just about necessity. It had become something deeper, rooted in respect, trust, and shared experience. As evening approached, Clara and Jack returned to the bunkhouse. They prepared a simple meal together, working seamlessly in the small space, passing utensils, stirring pots, and exchanging smiles. The act of cooking, once a routine task, now felt like a shared ritual, a way to celebrate the day's work and their growing connection. The warmth of the stove and the aroma of food created a cozy atmosphere, contrasting with the icy world outside. Clara felt a quiet happiness she hadn't felt in months. A contentment born from hard work, companionship, and the realization that she was no longer alone in the world. After the meal, they sat by the fire, the flickering flames casting soft shadows across the room. Clara noticed how Jack's expression had softened over the past days, revealing glimpses of a gentler, more vulnerable side. She realized that both of them had been changed by the storm, not just physically, but emotionally. They had shared fear, uncertainty, and exhaustion, but also trust, support, and understanding. In the quiet moments by the fire, Clara felt a connection that went beyond words, a sense of being truly seen and accepted for who she was, flaws and all. Jack, in turn, recognized the courage, resilience, and warmth that Clara brought into his life, appreciating her presence more than he had expected. Later, as the fire burned low and night settled over the ranch, Clara and Jack prepared for bed. The events of the past days had forged a bond between them that neither could ignore. The storm had tested their endurance, but it had also revealed their strengths and the value of companionship. As Clara climbed into her bed, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the loss, the struggle, the cold, and now the quiet hope that filled the bunkhouse. Jack moved to his bed across the room, giving her a reassuring nod. They didn't need words. The trust and understanding between them spoke volumes. Before sleep, Clara thought about the future. She had faced storms, both literal and emotional, and survived. She had learned to rely on her own strength and to trust in the support of someone who had proven dependable, compassionate, and understanding. The ranch, once a place she had come to out of necessity, had become a place of growth, healing, and hope. She realized that life, even after loss and hardship, could offer connection, purpose, and the possibility of joy. And in Jack, she had found a companion not just in work, but in life, someone who shared her values, her resilience, and her quiet desire to build something meaningful. Jack lay awake for a while, listening to the soft wind outside and the occasional creak of the wooden bunkhouse. He thought about Clara, her determination, her courage, and the subtle warmth she brought to the ranch. He realized that their shared experiences had created a bond that could not easily be broken. The trust and connection between them had grown stronger each day, forged through challenges and nurtured by understanding. He knew that the storm had been a turning point, not just for the ranch, but for both of them, and he felt a quiet hope for the future, a sense that life, even in its harshest forms, could offer companionship, understanding, and a chance for new beginnings. The next morning arrived with a promise of routine and continuity. Clara and Jack moved through their chores with ease, the bond between them evident in the way they worked together, shared tools, and exchanged brief, meaningful glances. The storm was behind them, but its lessons remained. The importance of trust, the value of cooperation, and the strength that comes from shared experience. They had faced adversity together, and in doing so, had discovered not only resilience, but a connection that offered comfort, hope, and the quiet assurance that they were not alone in the world. By the end of the day, the ranch was secure, the animals well cared for, and the work completed efficiently. Clara and Jack shared a moment by the barn, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the sky painted in hues of gold and pink. Clara felt a deep sense of satisfaction and peace. The challenges of the past days had been significant, but they had been met with courage, determination, and collaboration. More importantly, a relationship had grown between her and Jack, built on mutual respect, understanding, and shared experience. It was a connection that promised support, companionship, and the possibility of a meaningful future. As night fell, Clara and Jack prepared for rest, their thoughts filled with the events of the day and the quiet hope for tomorrow. The bunkhouse, once a mere shelter, had become a place of trust, warmth, and emotional connection. The snow-covered ranch outside was silent and still. But inside, two people who had faced hardship together were beginning to build a life grounded in resilience, mutual respect, and the possibility of companionship. Clara felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that she was no longer alone, and that with Jack by her side, life could hold promise, purpose, and hope.